Hello again. The other day, I was using the self-service till in my local supermarket when the red light began flashing. This indicated that I was attempting to buy something which needed the approval of a shop assistant. I was baffled by this, but when the woman arrived, it turned out that it was the disposable razors I was trying to buy, which was the problem. Anything with a blade, even a safety razor, is now treated as being a lethal weapon and can only be purchased by somebody over the age of 18. Seriously, a 17-year-old who needs to shave cannot buy a razor. This is a modern trend in this country of trying to prevent young people getting hold of blades or knives, lest they use them to stab each other to death. How one would accomplish this with a disposable razor, I have no idea, but there it is. On the way home, I was moved to reflect on this matter. Imagine, if you will, a land where practically every schoolboy and teenager owns or carries a knife. The possession of edged weapons is an accepted fact of life, and parents even encourage this unhealthy state of affairs by buying knives and giving them to their sons for birthday and Christmas presents. This knife culture is even reinforced by the church. Cathedrals across the country sell knives for children in their souvenir shops, with pictorial representations of the cathedral on the hilts. Knives are one of the most popular items too for children to bring back from holidays as souvenirs, say from the seaside. The largest youth organisation in the country encourages members openly to wear sheath knives on their belts. In schools, games involving the throwing and brandishing of knives are enormously popular among pupils, even for those below the age of 11. Incredibly, teachers smile indulgently at all this, tolerating the display of weapons. They take it for granted that small boys will be fooling around with knives and have one in their pocket at all times. The police make no attempt to discourage the carrying of knives. They too take it as read that most boys will have one in their possession, either at school or in the street. This imaginary excursion has taken us not to some remote and dysfunctional foreign country, nor to a strange and dystopian future, but rather back to the cosy childhood world of the British baby boomers. In those days, one would have been hard-pressed to find a boy who did not own several penknives, some with razor-sharp blades 4 or 5 inches long. Many of these were souvenirs from the seaside or school trips, with gaily coloured coats of arms or depictions of townscapes, castles or cathedrals and so on covering the handles. The thumbnail to this video shows a typical example of such a thing, a souvenir of a visit to London, which shows Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. This was the kind of thing which children routinely bought, even 7 or 8-year-olds. Nobody thought twice about such a state of affairs. The penknife was for many years an integral feature of British boyhood. These knives, which are known sometimes, by the way, as pocket knives, were originally devised, as the name suggests, to be carried on the person and used for sharpening quills into serviceable pens. Even when the nib has been carved, though, it's still prone to getting twisted or mangled during writing, and so it was necessary to mend it from time to time. A folding knife, which could safely be carried in the pocket, was the very thing for this, which of course is why they're called penknives. Because it had such innocuous origins, associated with learning and literacy, the penknife was not viewed in the same way as other knives. A youth armed with a Bowie knife might have been up to no good, but having a penknife in one's pocket was viewed in quite a different light. Due to the various attachments with which penknives typically came, they were often seen as useful tools rather than knives per se. Bottle and can openers, little saws, screwdrivers, the gadget for getting stones out of horses' hoofs. The list of supplementary gadgets on a good penknife was endless. At the heart of the thing, though, its very raison d'etre, as one might say, was a sharp blade. When debate in the press turns to the subject of knife crime, as it so frequently does, it is as well to recall the state of affairs which once existed in this country regarding the carrying of knives by children and young people, for it helps to put modern views in context. Worries about the carrying of blades and the legislation which has imposed such savage penalties on the practice of boys having knives in their pockets are all based on the assumption that children today are somehow different and far more ungovernable and wild than they were 60 years ago. It might have been safe for those who are now members of the judiciary or who sit in the legislature to carry knives around all the time when they were youngsters, but such a state of affairs can scarcely be tolerated with today's youth. Why, there's no telling what they'll get up to with the things. They'll be stabbing each other to death all over the place. I want viewers to stop for a moment and think this over. In 1967, say, children openly walked about with penknives, sheath knives, and so on, and no adult worried for a second about it. Those knives were never used to inflict injury on anybody. They were used for nothing worse than carving one's initials on a tree. Granted that it was all a long time ago and the world has changed since then in all kinds of ways, can anybody watching this video come up with an explanation for why there are now over 40 knife-related incidents a day just in London? Seriously, do people really not know why this is, or how this state of affairs has arisen? Or let's take another modern British problem, that of gun crime. This is not nearly as prevalent as knife crime, of course, but there are still regular and distressing murders carried out by means of shooting, especially in the capital. I'm thinking now particularly of gang-related crime. In 1967, the year that knives were carried by almost every teenager in the country, there were no restrictions whatsoever on the sale of shotguns in Britain. Anybody over the age of 21 could walk into a gun shop and buy a shotgun. No evidence of identity needed to be produced. No firearm certificate was required. Just hand over the money and walk out with a 12-bore shotgun and ammunition. Obviously, this would be a very undesirable state of affairs in modern Britain. But why? What is it which has changed since 1967, which means that we dare not allow knives and shotguns to be floating around in the general population?